This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. Be sure and check them out, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. This is episode number 280 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined us and hope you're taking time to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. So, got an interesting guest in this particular episode, Elise Freda-Colon, and Elise is another one of those therapists, or us therapists, or however you want to think about this, that has made the transition from doing traditional kinds of one-to-one therapy to moving into more coaching and doing kind of what I like to call a one-to-many model. And so I'm looking forward to you hearing from Elise and our conversation just around making those transitions. Elise has been in practice for quite a while, and I think she has experienced some of the same struggles that a lot of us experience when we're moving through this private practice journey, just about really figuring out who are your ideal clients, what are the things that you enjoy working with people on, and then how you pivot into really honing your niche, but also not only honing your niche, but also moving into something that is a little more sustainable for you. A lot of us have experienced, having high caseloads, particularly if you've worked for an agency, but you can also fall into that trap in private practice. So that's kind of what our conversation is about, and looking forward to you hearing from Elise. But before we get to that, I'd love for you to check out, again, the resources that we've got at Practice of Therapy. And if you'll just go to practiceoftherapy.com, you can find all the stuff that we've got there. Two communities I'd like to point out to you that we have going is one is the Practice Launch Club, which is a community mainly for folks that are just getting started in private practice. Maybe they're making that transition from agency work into private practice, or some of the folks in that group are folks that are coming out of graduate school and trying to figure out how to move right into private practice. But it's really for those folks that are just getting started and navigating all the stuff around starting a private practice. And the other community I'd like to point out to you is the Group Practice Focus Group. I'm still working on the name of that. But anyway, it is a group for particularly small group practice owners that are also insurance based. And so very specific in that particular niche, but that will be coming to the end of that cohort here before long. And so I would invite you to go over and apply to become a member of that, particularly if you have a small group practice that is also insurance based. And so we work with each other just around all of the issues of running a small private practice and the ins and outs of insurance and accepting insurance from clients and filing claims and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, check those out. Again, go to practiceoftherapy.com and you'll find all of that stuff there. So I invite you to look. Also, before we get to my conversation with Elise. Love for you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft network of podcasts, and also from our sponsor of the podcast, and that is TherapyNotes.
Hey there, I'm Chris McDonald, and if you don't know me yet, I'm host of the Holistic Counseling Podcast, which is for therapists who want to deepen their knowledge of holistic modalities and build their practice with confidence. The Holistic Counseling Podcast is proudly part of the Psychcraft Podcast Network, a network of podcasts focused on helping people live more meaningful and productive lives. Join me each week as we explore the best practices for integrating holistic approaches into therapy and delve into the many benefits. Whether you're looking for new techniques or seeking to deepen your own personal journey towards wellness, this podcast is the perfect companion for your holistic path. If you haven't listened yet, you can find it over at holisticcounselingpodcast.com and discover other resources, including products, books, and other trainings to help support you in your holistic journey.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so happy for you to get to know Elise Frida Colon. Welcome, Elise. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes. So, Elise, as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Okay. So, interestingly, I've wanted to be a therapist since I really, as long as I can remember, 13. I actually still have one of my notebooks. So they used to have these denim notebooks that, like binders, that you would put all your stuff in, and my friends would write on the outside with these fun markers. And I wrote on there, future therapist, have problems, call me, with my phone number. And I still have that to this day. And this was
fun.
Junior high school. So this is my true calling.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And I really never deviated. This was what I wanted to do, and just plowed straight ahead. And I've been in private practice since probably 2006, maybe around there. And I have a fantastic practice with fantastic clients, and it's just the greatest career in the entire world.
Well, yeah. I would agree. It's interesting how we all land in the careers that we do. So, people have heard this story from me before, but what inspired me to go into becoming a therapist was the movie Ordinary People. I'm dating myself with that movie, but there was a scene in
Timothy Hunt. I know.
Yeah. So, but that was what inspired me to go into it, because of a scene in there. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. So Elise, I know one of the things that you and I were just chatting about, you've made kind of the transition from going from kind of the traditional therapist model to doing more life coaching. And I know that there's probably a whole story behind that for you. So do you mind sharing that?
Absolutely. So interesting, kind of a little bit of a backstory. My private practice, you know how it is, especially people, let's say, of an older generation, people, those of us who got into it a while back, it's so much trial and error, and so much of the stuff we need to know is never taught. We find out by asking a colleague, like, so what do I do about this? Or how do I do? it's really lacking, or it had been, in terms of how do you create a business that's sustainable. And so you just kind of did what other people did, or what you kind of learned in the agency you worked in. So when I started my practice, I got on insurance panels because that's what I thought you were supposed to do. And, while that was a nice way to grow a practice, it became really unsustainable as someone who doesn't have any admin, trying to keep up with the paperwork and the inexplicable denials and all the phone. It just became too arduous. So then I went through a whole evolution of getting off insurance panels and saying, no, I'm just going to do this self-pay. I'm not going to deal with any kind of outside agency. So that was a whole process that turned out to be fantastic, where now, I'm not beholden to anyone making rules or telling me what I can and can't do. So I got my practice to this great place, yet I don't know, I still wasn't satisfied. Like, what's next that I can do? And one of the programs that I have written, I hope I can say this, it's
sure.
Stop Dating Assholes, came about because what I found over the years was that so many women were complaining about the same things, and in my estimation, making the same mistakes in their dating journey. And I got to the point where I almost wanted to make a brochure or a little booklet, like, okay, here, you're going into take this book with you and consult it. And here are some pitfalls you can avoid. And here are some things you want to be really aware that you're doing or not doing. And that's kind of how it came about, where when I found that it was like, oh, all of these women are having the same issues. How am I able to get this information out on a larger scale? Much more so than I could ever do one-to-one in a private practice, because as you know, the hours are limited. There's only so many hours you can sit in that chair.
Right.
So I started looking into coaching. And what's interesting is that as a therapist, I tend to work very much like a coach. I'm very present day focused, goal oriented, solution oriented. So it seemed like a kind of a seamless transition. And I'm just, it's kind of at the beginning of it. I've written 2 courses, another one called Are You Mad at Me?, which is for people-pleasing women who lie awake at night worrying about all the things that they said wrong that day and all the people who are angry or disappointed in them, and trying to help them to sort of turn off that voice and kind of step into their power.
Yes. And isn't it interesting how I think for most of us, when we create our niche in practice, we see the same things coming up over and over again. And I think part of the I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, part of the kind of quote unquote burnout that we've experienced, if we've been doing it a while, is that we're going over the same things with people over and over again. And so why not take that from, as I like to say, from a one-to-one model to a one-to-many model and put it in a format that can resonate with more people?
Absolutely. And in terms of I know the licensure rules are different state to state, but for me and my degree, I'm only licensed to practice in the state of New York. So being able to bring this to ideally a larger audience, people anywhere in the country and the world, really, that idea is so exciting to me, because you're not limited to, well, they have to be standing in the state while I deliver this information. And that idea, one-to-one versus one-to-many is really, I think, what the appeal of coaching is, to be able to ideally bring this to a group of people at a time, as opposed to just one. It just, it just sort of opens the world up. And I love the idea of it.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing too that we kind of hit on a little bit is really making sure that what you're doing is, it's a term that I've heard recently, and a shout out to Casey Compton, who is a friend. She used the term lifestyle congruence with your business. And so I love that. And so thinking about, like you said, we can only spend so much time butt in chair and being able to work with people, whereas there's a lot of opportunities to work with people in other ways that are probably just as effective, if not more effective sometimes.
Absolutely. And when I went through this whole evolution with my practice and sort of changed up the way I was doing it and got a whole new fee structure, I remember a friend said to me, "Wait a minute, you're going to do something else? Why aren't you happy? I thought you got your practice exactly where you wanted. How come that's not enough?" And I'm like, I don't know. It's not. There's this drive, like I got to do more.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just my own idiosyncrasy, but it feels like it can be bigger,
Yeah. So, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about kind of your evolution in that and how you made those so far? From being kind of moving into more coaching, and then the other thing you mentioned that people might be interested in is, just making the decision to get off of insurance panels and go more, I guess, assuming cash pay.
Yeah, that was tremendous, because I, for a long time, told myself the story that nobody would pay out of pocket for therapy. I really did. And I believed it. Mm-hmm. And it was a culmination of many, many, many frustrating situations of hours and hours and hours of lost time trying to call. If you've ever tried to call an insurance company to find out why a claim was denied, you understand what I mean. And mm-hmm. I didn't have I'm a very organized person. I didn't have the time or resources to be able to do that. And still it was taking away. And I was getting frustrated. And I remember I came to work one day and I got a letter. You know what the insurance companies would do? One of the insurance companies would send me a letter and say, "Oh, 2 years ago, we overpaid you by X mm-hmm. number of dollars. Write us a check." And if you mm-hmm. didn't send them a check, they would just take it out of someone else's account. I mean, right. Crazy stuff, accounting nightmares. But one week I got a letter that two of the people I had worked, two clients, they said, "We are denying all claims from this period to this period because we don't think it was clinically necessary." I said, "That's it. I'm out. And mm-hmm. as is my nature, I sat down and I wrote a letter to every single insurance company and said, "I'm out. I'm no longer a provider." They gave me, every one of them gave me my date that I am disenrolled. Do you know that I was disenrolled from my last insurance company? I'm going to say March 11th of 2020. Mm-hmm. So I get off every panel. Yeah. Woohoo! And then the shuts down. I'm like, oh my God, what did I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how has it changed your practice? I mean, to do that, I mean, what are you finding that obviously you're not having to spend all the time on filing claims and follow up and all of that sort of thing. So, yeah. So how have you found the ability to get clients and the ability to bring in referrals and that kind of thing?
It is one of the best decisions I ever made for my practice. Mm-hmm. Changing that mindset, telling myself these stories about what people can and can't do. That was all my own stuff that I had to work through. I found it to be so fabulous on so many levels. Clinically, I'm much more willing to talk about things that, let's say in the past, like money was always a weird thing, to talk about. And I heard someone recently say, "Oh, we have a secretary who takes the money because you never want to bring money into a therapy room." And I was like, mm-hmm. What? Mm-hmm. Of course you do. Of course you do. And you need to be talking mm-hmm. about this. Mm-hmm. So to me, that was kind of eye-opening. And also, I don't know, I find that when people are investing in therapy, they seem to take it, they're very committed, seem to take it really seriously. So mm-hmm. I mean, I have very few cancellations, almost zero no-shows. People are mm-hmm. in it. Not that they're not necessarily in it when they're insurance-based, but I think that there's almost an added layer of investment on their part. Yeah. And what I also find is interesting is that as therapists, sometimes you can get resentful. I mean, whether or not therapists want to admit it, if you're slaving away and seeing a ton of clients and hardly getting by, and your clients are coming in paying you a $5 copay talking about their trip around the world, sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
why can't I do this? So I just, the idea that I make the rules about my practice and it works for my life is
Mm-hmm.
so freeing and wonderful.
Yeah.
I think the biggest fear that I think everybody has when they either get into a self-pay practice or they transition to a self-pay is that all my clients will leave.
Yeah.
But the truth is, and some did leave, and I did wonderful work with some people, and that was the end of our journey. But the truth is that if you have a practice where you are making a living that works for you, you don't need to have 50 people on your caseload.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't anyway, because that's too many people to see, right?
Right. That's too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Well, and so what was your process in starting your course and finding that niche?
Yeah. So again, as I said, I got my practice to this great place and said, okay, now what?
Uh-huh.
And I started hearing about people doing coaching who were therapists. And, I think a lot of us have that bias, like that
Mm-hmm.
coach is sort of like a therapist wannabe or someone trying to do our work without any of the credentials or education.
Mm-hmm.
I know that feelings kind of persist out there. But when you realize the flexibility or the things that a coach is allowed to do without all of the same rules and regulations, why wouldn't we want to kind of jump on that and be able to do our work on a larger scale if that's
Right.
something that we want to do? And again, the way that I practice is very much in line with the idea of coaching. So it seemed like a perfect fit. So I took a course about how to write for therapists who want to move beyond private practice and how to write a program step by step, which I did. And it's been a long process though, getting the site up, and I hired a social media team. And so there's been a huge learning curve, but it's been super fun to see what has kind of come out of that.
Yes. And so in your mind, how do you differentiate between the difference between therapy and coaching?
The difference, I would say, is in coaching, my goal is to focus on a particular issue. So let's say for the dating one, we're not talking about a whole bunch of stuff. We're talking about dating, and I'm trying to help women to date in the most systematic and strategic way possible, keeping in mind what is their ultimate goal and how do we get them there in a more seamless way. Or for the overthinking woman, that's what we're focusing on. So it's in therapy, it can be whatever they can sort of bring to the table. But in coaching, it's going to be much more specific to that particular issue. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And so I bet there's some people that are curious with this whole dating thing. What are the common themes that you've seen as you put your course together?
So many. And so much of what I have written in this curriculum is really born out of things that I have heard women say over and over and over again in one form or another over the last 20 years. Things like going to meet someone with a preconceived idea about how you want it to go, where it's almost like you go in with an agenda, like, well, maybe he'll be the one. So then you can start to filter out important information that might present itself that doesn't necessarily fit with that. So almost going blinders on, as opposed to what I call, say, data collection. Let's say I'll talk to a woman and she'll say, oh my gosh, I want to date with this guy. He's perfect. He's not perfect. You don't know him. You met him once, right? You're collecting data. So what do you know about him? Right. And don't jump ahead of yourself, because there's no way you could know someone after one date. You know the things he's shared with you and you know what you noticed about him, but you can't make an assessment that he's wonderful. You don't know that yet. So being more cognizant of that I'm getting to know this person and paying attention to what he says, what he doesn't say. Does he follow through on what he says he'll do? Is he a reliable person? you have to pay attention to. And I have a freebie that I guess you go to the link in my bio, and the freebie is a checklist that I have often used with women, where I have them get very clear about what is it you want in a partner. I want you to list qualities, and then I have them put them in order, right, of the most important things in this person. And I have them bring it in, and we go through it and really get clear on what's most important, what's the next most important thing. And then I have them do the same thing with a list of deal breakers, things I will absolutely not accept. And it can be really interesting how a woman might struggle with that, never really having thought about it. Or they have much more superficial things on the list about the way the person looks, or, their height, or their job, or their whatever. But I always say, when you weigh height against trustworthiness, which one is more important to you, right? If you had to choose.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the things for people to recognize, and I think this ties in well with what you've done with the dating course, is there's so much stuff that we do as therapists day in and day out. We have, in many ways, the curse of knowledge, and that we know this stuff so well that we take it for granted that everybody else knows it too. And so, like this, the things that you're pointing out might seem like common sense to people, but in reality, they just don't know those things.
Absolutely, you would think it's common sense. And I did for a while, until it was woman after woman after woman. Like, wait a second. Are women just kind of on these apps just swiping? Nope. Wait a second. Those are people. Why are you so quick to go through them, right? And that you're stopping on, what is it? Is it a nice picture? Is it a photogenic guy? Does he have a nice smile? What else is there that's important? So if you've decided to go online and do these dating apps, I encourage women to be as strategic as possible with what it is that you're looking for. Give people a chance. Maybe the guy who's not 6 feet tall is fantastic, but you'll never know if you've already ruled him out over something he has no control over, right? The other thing that I find happens a lot is making excuses. So let's say a woman goes out with a guy, and I'll call you and we'll get together next week. And then she doesn't hear from him. And then she starts with the excuses of, okay, well, but he said he was really busy with work, or maybe, that expression, everything after blood is bullshit. It's like, well, he said he was going to call, but he got really, really busy. So I wasn't able to see him this week. And to not just make excuses for behavior. If it's, he said he would do something and he didn't do it, that's important information. And you can't filter that out because it's inconvenient to your view of what you want this relationship to ultimately be.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. So one of the things that's probably, I'm guessing for some of our listeners, they're starting to think about, okay, what is something comparable that I could do in my own practice or that particular issues? What was kind of your starting point in pulling all this together around this particular niche?
I started to, as I said, notice that the same themes kept coming up with women, and particularly around dating. So I started jotting down some of the themes that I would see. And I found I was repeating myself a lot. Like, don't make excuses, watch his behavior. Do not pay attention to the words are inconsequential if the behavior doesn't match. I don't care what somebody promises you. What does he do? What do his actions show? And that is always going to be of much more importance than what he says.
Right.
And if he tells you something that sounds like complete BS, it's probably complete BS, right? Don't make excuses for it because, now I got to start again. That's the other thing I see a lot is the in a rush. And more so, I tend to work with more women, so my perception could be skewed in that way. But women also have the whole, kind of biological clock thing. And I can't count the number of women who have said, I'm 32. Oh, what am I supposed to do? Start over again and find somebody else? And I wanted to be married by now, and I wanted to have kids by now. What am I going to? And what if I don't meet anybody? And it's like the pressure of the rest of their lives is riding on if this guy makes the cut. So you can see where it would be difficult to do a real clear analysis, because that they might not like the answer that they find.
Yeah. Yeah. So so you started taking these ideas and pulling them together. And is your course, tell us about the course itself that you put together.
Sure. It's a small group, 6-week coaching program where we meet via Zoom once a week. I have assignments that I ask you to do in between to kind of think about and reinforce some of what we're doing. And we have accountability calls, and then they have access to me a few times a week via video. And again, it's in the beginning stages, so I know that I will tweak this as we go on. But my goal is to be able to kind of bring this to a larger audience and to help women to feel much more empowered, and that they are going into dating with a clear objective, as opposed to a shrug of the shoulders. Let's see, who knows. You treat it with the seriousness, to whatever degree that is, that it deserves in your life. And if you want to meet a partner, I think you need to go in with a strategy.
Yeah, that's good. Tell folks how they can get in touch with you if they want to find out more about your coaching and about the stuff that you're doing and how you can help them.
Okay, people can find me at Coaching with Alyse, ALYSE, on Instagram and Facebook. And there is a link in my bio where you can grab that freebie, which, if I say so myself, is pretty cool. My website, I'm all over the place. AlyseFreemanCologne.com, AFCtherapy.com. You can find me anywhere.
All right. Well, any parting thoughts that you have, Alyse, around all of these things that we've talked about?
Be intentional. Women who are dating, be intentional. Grab my freebie. There's a place to start. If you haven't seriously sat down and thought about these things in terms of what your deal breakers and must-haves are, I implore you, do that as your starting point and kind of get some clarity around that.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyse. Well, again, big thanks to Alyse for joining me on the podcast. You know, one of the things I love about this media and doing podcasts is that I get to really have good conversations with a lot of great people from across the country and across the world, particularly in the mental health fields, and just learning about the different ways in which you could go about practicing and being in private practice. And I think I admire Alyse for really kind of setting some clear boundaries for herself around her practice and how she wants to work with people. And I think it's, as you can hear from her enthusiasm, she is really passionate about helping women and just in the dating world and how they can navigate that in healthy ways. And so be sure to check out Alyse's things. As she mentioned, as we mentioned, we've got the links here in the show notes and the show summary. And I would encourage you to think outside the box. See, people hear that from me a good bit, but you know, the way that we craft our practices or how we put together our practices and the kind of clients that we want to serve, really the sky's the limit. And I would just say, give yourself permission to be creative around that and do it in your way. So yeah, again, thanks, Alyse, for being on the podcast. And also, before we go, if you'll be sure and go over to the website, practiceoftherapy.com, and you can see all the resources we've got over there. We've got tons of free resources, but also resources that are very specific to different kinds of issues. So be sure and check that out, practiceoftherapy.com. And also, again, a big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the electronic health record system that I use in my practice, and I'm always impressed with all the things that they're updating and changing, and just making it better and easier to use. It's really a great platform. And if you'll use the coupon code when you go to practiceoftherapy.com, TherapyNotes and use the promo code or coupon code, whatever you want to call it, of just Gordon, Gordon. You can get 2 months of that service for free to try them out. So be sure and check it out. Well, take care, folks. Hope you have a great rest of your week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. And do hit that follow button wherever you might be listening to the podcast and leave us a review. That'll just make it easier for other people to find us. Take care, folks, and we'll be talking to you again. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.